Beach. So we'll turn it over to you, sir. You're on mute, Bo. There you go.
Can you hear me now?
Now you're good.
All right, thank you. Once again, my name is Bo Svendsbo. I'm a lieutenant down here in Huntington Beach. I'm actually assigned to our professional standards unit, but I also I'm in charge of our SWAT team and have been for quite a while. So that's how I end up getting kind of tasked with the tactical plan and such for civil unrest and protest type events in our city. So this one, I'm hoping you guys are all aware of. It's a website that's still up because they're planning another one. So we're gearing up for another one repeat here on Saturday coming up. But this one we had last Friday. The website is called wehaverights.com. Wehaverights.com, and it's a pretty professional website. It's pretty organized. So we got wind of this through some of our intel folks about a week prior to the event. So we started doing some planning, getting ready for it. This is a multi-location protest, so it's in 6 different cities up and down the coast. We were, for whatever reason, the local Orange County epicenter, which we've become. So we identified and reached out to the protest organizers. We met with them ahead of time, which I think is a key takeaway, is to meet with them, find out kind of what their agenda is, what their end game is, so to speak. They are, as most of these organizers for these types of events today and into tomorrow, I think, are the open up California type, get businesses going again. They're generally very pro law enforcement. So we found the same with the organizers here. They're very respectful, very pro law enforcement, trying to do the right thing. Of course, they do attract the other element, right? So we get the alt-right, which we have quite a few that live in our city that we've identified at several of these events. We've had previous clashes with Antifa as recently as April of last year here in our city when the other side shows up. So that's usually generally our concern with these events, is that we will have that alt-right and that alt-left show up and clash, and that's generally when we end up having problems. So in identifying this event, and it's up again, the exact same map that we had on Friday is up again on their website now. And so we saw immediately and noticed that there was a gridlock attempt on their plan. So that was one of our concerns with PCH being a major artery through our city. We didn't want that Michigan-style gridlock to happen. So basically, we came up with a plan to taper PCH down to 1 lane in each direction, basically through our downtown area, which in hindsight, in and of itself, also created a little bit of a gridlock. But we were okay with that versus having them gridlock the whole street and kind of controlling it. So that mitigated that. We never had them attempt a gridlock, but that obviously gave us a bunch of contingencies to deal with that portion of it. At the same time, they had a march plan from Main and Olive to our pier, which, if you're not familiar with the area, it's 2 blocks. So it's not a long march. We have the ability to shut down Main Street in order to facilitate that if the crowd grew. So we had that as a contingency plan. This thing was supposed to start at noon. By 11:30, there was probably 300-400 people in our pier plaza area, which is kind of the boardwalk plaza area right in front of our pier, right at the corner of Main and PCH. So basically we kind of shifted. We started deploying our assets. We had an all hands on deck type of a setup that day for our officers. We brought in close to 150 officers and other personnel for that event that day, which, if you don't know all about us, we're 220 or so sworn. So basically, it was everybody that was not working a regular patrol that day was brought in, pretty much. How we configured it is we basically configured about 10 different tactical squads, all had a sergeant and approximately 5 officers each. Little mobile units, we had the ability to deploy them on street corners. We had the ability to move them around fairly easily, as opposed to having larger squads with like 12 to 15 people. I found it pretty convenient to have those smaller squads all led by a sergeant to be able to move them around. Obviously, when we met with the protesters, we talked about some things that we were concerned about. We talked about our concern for the gridlock. We told them, hey, that's basically not going to happen. The organizers actually said, you know, it's not, our intent is not to have a stopping gridlock. Our intent is to have a route for people to drive if they were not interested in being out amongst the crowd. So they were both kind of happening at the same time. So when they told us that, we asked them, okay, that'd be great if you can kind of clarify that on the website. The organizer said she would, but that never did get put up. Nevertheless, we disrupted that by closing a bunch of streets down and basically forcing them to make a larger loop if that were to, you know, be the case that they were going to try and gridlock. The traffic, as far as the gridlock route, never really materialized to be a problem for us, but obviously the traffic back and forth on PCH did become an issue. So we had a two-pronged plan for that day. One was obviously the traffic. So we brought in a bunch of motor officers, which turned out to be instrumental, parking control officers and tow trucks also basically on standby all along PCH. We had kind of tow trucks staged every half a mile or so, kind of, and we ended up not towing any cars that day, but we had them there for a visual deterrent. And whether or not that worked, obviously we won't know for sure, but we did not end up towing any cars. Our second prong to the plan was obviously the protest walk. And we had a contingency to be able to close down Main Street if we needed to do that. But like I mentioned, by 11:30, there was 300-400 people in Pier Plaza. So the people that actually did gather for the walk at Main and Olive at noon turned out to be only like 50 people or so. So we did not close down Main Street. They were forced to utilize the sidewalks coming down to Pier Plaza. Obviously, a significant presence. A high visibility patrol as far as officers in Pier Plaza, officers on all corners. We ended up bringing in regional mounted enforcement units, the horse guys, and they were, I was never big into horses, but I'm a huge believer in their abilities and what they can do as far as crowd control and mobile field force type of presence. And they became very instrumental at about 12:30 or so in the afternoon when the crowds kind of probably was at the peak, and that's estimated to be about 2,500 people at that intersection. And they started surging into the street, and we ordered the horses basically to come up and push them off of the street. Now, part of that surge was kind of in hindsight because we only had one lane open, so that left two lanes in each direction basically coned off, so that kind of left a void there, so to speak, for the people to then fill, right? So they were basically stepping out into the street for, you know, a lane, and then, you know, sooner into two lanes because that was not traffic. So we started opening up. We opened up the number 2 lane as quickly as we could at that time. And now one thing I'll be doing differently this weekend is we'll be opening up that number 2 lane a little bit sooner, because as traffic flows, especially on a major street like PCH, it's kind of a natural wall to keep people out of the street, actually. But nevertheless, when they started surging and it looked like they were right on the cusp of taking over that intersection, basically there were a bunch of people running in the middle of it. And when the light turned green, you know, people stayed in the street. We brought the horses up, and they basically pushed people back off of the street onto the sidewalk and into Pier Plaza. And that took, it was super quick. Once again, I'm a huge believer in the horses. They did a phenomenal job. We also had shadow teams. And Shaun, stop me here if I need to pause or if I'm going too long. Shadow teams, by that I mean a group of officers, and I basically just took TAC teams. I had my SWAT guys split up into a few different TAC teams. When we noticed, and you'll notice people in the group that are really kind of stand out like a sore thumb. They were either the alt-right or even the alt-left. Some of the Antifa people will show up, and they'll be obvious who they are. When we started noticing a couple, 3 people like that, I would deploy a shadow team on them. It's basically that shadow team is just in their hip pocket. I told them, hey, stay with these guys, stay about 10 feet behind them, and make it completely obvious that we're following them right on their ass. If they turn right, we turn right, and make it very uncomfortable for them to, come up with any plan or take any criminal action. So we did that a couple times with a few people that looked like they were there for no good. That's pretty effective as well. We had drones, which are also very instrumental in, to be able to see where people forming. I was able to, hey, give me a traffic status at, Main and Orange, and they were able to, give me that information, that stuff that I couldn't see in a matter of a few seconds. So if you're not using drones, I highly recommend that. They're also a game changer, I think, for us in law enforcement. So debriefing, some stuff we learned, our posture. I think that posture is important as far as, that the politics plays into that as well. But your police chief or sheriff, and obviously your city government is also going to make a determination. What's your posture? Do we want to allow them to take PCH in Maine? I mean, if we want to allow them to take the intersection, then we got a different posture, right? Then we're kind of just containing them there. We had decided early on we were not going to do that. So as soon as that started happening, we brought the horses in, which mitigated that. But we need to know what our posture, what direction from above is. A good example of that was Laguna Beach had something over the weekend where, I don't know if you guys have seen that, where a group of protesters, like 100 of them, basically stormed the beach. And if you watch that video, which I think is available on YouTube, it is quite obvious that there was a little bit of confusion, at least, to say the least, some of the early officers when the protesters started doing that. So obviously, from a command standpoint, you need clear direction to our officers. You need strong supervision. If you need something done, it needs to get done. Some officers, obviously, as I'm sure with most of our agencies, they want to come in and they want to just hang in the background. We need to have people out there being active. Our motorists were active throughout the day, all up and down PCH. They were, at the same time the horses pushed people off one side of PCH, they basically formed a skirmish line and pushed everybody off of the north side. So they were very effective also. And then the politics plays a part, obviously. As in our city, the city attorney's opinion is a little bit different than some of our other politicians. So as far as having direction on that, and then the governor's order obviously played in, and how do we enforce that? Do we use the government code? There's a health and safety code with the health officers. We've found in speaking to some other neighboring cities here in our area that if you have a municipal code that applies, using that, I think is probably, seems to be the most popular way to go. So we've got that in place to use a municipal code also, for example, for your beaches. Has our response altered? Well, we're obviously, our guys have the ability to have masks. They all carry N95, and we also have those cloth masks. But I think generally, big picture, mobile field force, protests, as far as our posture, from a tactical standpoint, in my opinion, hasn't changed all that much. And I'll shoot it back over to you, Shaun. I think I was within my time limit, hopefully.
I think that was good, and I'm about to throw up a poll question, which is actually two questions together about what kind of direction everyone on the call here has received, if any, from your city attorneys or your county councils or anything about the direction of these protests, because it's not during a normal time frame, right? They're out there extending their First Amendment rights, but at the same time, there's also shelter-in-place orders and other things that play into that. So I think we're kind of curious to see what folks have been dealing with, and this may kind of help wrap up Bo's comments and turn over to Orrlando. So I'll give everyone about half a minute or so to answer these two questions. I'm going to throw them up right now, and then we'll share the results. About if you've had to alter your protest or your incident command response during this, and have you received any kind of guidance? And so after about 30 seconds, we'll share these results so everyone can kind of see. But that's what we're seeing. I talked to an assistant chief from the CHP's Protective Services Division. He wasn't able to attend today, but he said if there's anything else I can get for CPOA, he may be able to give us kind of a debrief about how they handled it at the Capitol here in Sacramento, because you had folks out there protesting, but they at the same time said, hey, you need to disperse. So they were, how they were enforcing that. I'm sure he can give us a kind of idea. So looks like about 65% have voted, so I'll give it another few seconds. But did that come into play, Bo, at all about, I know you mentioned the municipal code, but in the initial planning when you were reaching out to the protest groups, was there any conversations about it being different these days and how you were going to react to that as we get the last few?
Yeah, slightly. I mean, you know, obviously the constitutional rights to assemble and protest, you know, we're well aware of those. And, you know, we had some discussions on, you know, internally regarding, you know, unlawful assembly and all that. So some of those discussions came into play with our command staff here at the PD for sure.
So I'll share here the results of the poll. So as you can see for the first question, the majority of agencies haven't had to alter your response. Some are in that process. And then for the second question about any kind of guidance, a similar percentage, about 43%, haven't received any kind of guidance from the city or county yet. But as a number of those, you can see a good percentage we're in that process now. That is a good kind of segue over to Orlando with Sac Sheriff, because I know there's been some protests in Sacramento, mostly in kind of the CHP's jurisdiction around the Capitol. But I know, like many agencies perhaps on the line, there's a few that have a plan in place for if protests come your way. And so we'll be happy to hear from him, unless there's any last minute few questions for Bo before we turn it over, or we can just hold till the end. All right, so Orlando, I'll turn it over to you, sir.
All right, Shaun, thank you. So I'm Lieutenant Orlando Mays, Sacramento County Sheriff's Office. I'm assigned now as a watch commander to one of our contract cities, which is the Rancho Cordova Police within the Sacramento County Sheriff's Office. I'm also our mobile field force field commander as well. And so kind of answer your question as far as our response, we've had a few protests. Most of those have been at the Capitol, the state Capitol, that is controlled, and by the Highway Patrol, California Highway Patrol. So they have not asked for a mutual aid, but if they were to ask for one, then we would respond probably with the other large agency that we have in our area, which is the Sacramento Police Department. We worked with them before last year on a really big major use of force incident where there was protest from a Sacramento Police Department incident, and Highway Patrol, Police Department, Sheriff's Office, we all worked congruently together on that deal as well. So far, our agency has not had to respond to this point to a protest like Bo's agency for Huntington Beach, but kind of our game plan is couplefold. Number one, our patrol personnel, they've all been trained up on crowd control tactics. So all of our field service patrol division has been trained up as of last year. And then also we did an update recently to COVID, or right at the beginning of the COVID incident as well, to get our people, make sure we're all on the same page, make sure they had the appropriate equipment. And then also with the protective equipment that you would use for COVID-19, making sure that our people were outfitted and equipped with that as well. We also have a mobile field force team as well, and that is basically comprised of all our detectives for our impact division and our centralized investigations division. Those officers, those detectives, they're all outfitted. They have home retention vehicles. If there's any call out or protracted event or anything that's a pre-planned event that requires that type of robust response, then they would respond out to this pre-planned event. We would come up with a game plan on how to respond with that. That could also be where they respond independently, or they can also respond with our patrol divisions that's impacted as well, depending on the event. Again, so far we have not had to deploy at this point. We're very aware of the incidents that have been occurring and the protests that have been occurring at the Capitol. But again, you know, we've just been on standby to this point. But that's kind of how ours is laid out. Again, we have a very good relationship with the Highway Patrol and then also Sacramento Police Department and the other outside agencies in our area to make sure that we're ready to go in case we did get deployed or called out on a mutual aid.
With that, any questions or comments about what you've been dealing with, either in the chat bar, or go ahead and unmute yourself and ask either gentleman any questions, or if there's any comments from folks about what you've been dealing with that may be helpful, now's the time. Seeing and hearing none. It sounds like each of you have been dealing with different, aspects of this differently, either in a, a response approach or if it does happen. But I know there was some key takeaways to share with folks from your agency. So we appreciate everyone's time on this. And if there's no other questions or final comments, then we'll just remind everyone to tune in on Thursday when we discuss the issues that zero bail in California has presented us with, in addition to all the other recent criminal justice reforms, how this plays into part. But we appreciate everyone's participation today and hope everyone has a great rest of the afternoon.
Thank you, Bo and Shaun.
Thanks, Bo and Orlando. Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys.